Today's project is going to be to convert this early 1950s Ferguson TO30 from 6 volt to 12 volt. I'm not going to be installing a prefabricated or pre-assembled kit like you'd buy online. Instead, I happen to have the basic components laying around the shop, so I figured I'd try to make it myself. So what I have here is a 12 volt car battery, a 12 volt ignition coil, and a 12 volt alternator, the GM variety. Okay, I'll be trying to take you guys step by step on how to do this yourself at home if you happen to have all these parts and need to make it work. It's a pretty simple system. There's not a lot going on, so it shouldn't be too complicated. So let's get started. I'm going to start by removing the original 6 volt battery. This is a positive ground system, or at least it is at this point. We'll be converting that to a more traditional negative ground 12 volt source here when we do our conversion. For right now, let's just get this thing out of the way. Now that our battery is removed, I'm going to go ahead and focus on swapping out our coil. So this is pretty straightforward, especially since my replacement is already mounted in its bracket. So I'm going to just take this bolt out, and the same on the bottom, disconnect our two wires here, one going to our power source, the other going to the points in our distributor, and then I'll disconnect the distributor lead here, the coil wire. Right, my coil's off. Here's the old one, and here's my replacement. So this is supposed to be our 6 volt coil, and you can see our polarity here, the positive on this side, negative on this side. So this is going to be our first change when reinstalling a 12 volt coil. So the original, the wire going to the distributor itself, to the points, was actually positive, and the negative went up to our ignition switch because this is a positive ground. So everything is backwards from what you would anticipate or what is normal to us now. When converting, our 12 volt coil is going to go positive to the key switch, to the positive side of the battery, and our negative side is going to go into our distributor. So that's what we'll do. Real simple. This just bolts right back up like normal, but instead of putting the wires back where they were, we're just going to flip them. Here's our 12 volt coil. Our coil wire is connected back to our distributor. The wire coming off the negative side of the coil is going to our points, and the positive terminal of the coil is heading up to our key switch or ignition power. Okay, what I'm going to do next, now that that's done, is remove our voltage regulator. Since this has a generator on it currently, it has to have a way of regulating that voltage, and that is done through this box and all these connections. Since we're going to a one-wire alternator, which is internally regulated, we don't need any of this. So I'm going to go ahead and unbolt it, unhook the connections, and we'll go from there. Here's our voltage regulator outside of the tractor. Went ahead and pulled it out. We have two mounting bolts. One goes here, the other here. And those match up to two mounting holes right there on that plate. As far as the connections themselves, you just take a flat screwdriver, loosen these screws, and you can either slide the terminals out if they're open-ended, or if they're closed, like this one, just go ahead and remove the screw altogether so that comes out. Now we have two wires going to our generator on the other side, and our harness is zip tied up. I'm going to go ahead and cut those and disconnect it and remove that harness because we will not be reusing it. The next step, and probably the hardest, is getting this alternator to fit in place of our old generator. Now, if you buy the kit, it comes with the brackets to bolt up and everything goes together okay. We don't have those, so we're going to have to see what we can keep and what we need to shim or change or make work. So to start out, let's get our old generator out of the way. That means one bolt here holding this ear. We have a bolt down here holding this ear, and another here, right there, holding the other. So 3 mounting points on this generator. We'll get the belt off, take the generator out, and mock up our alternator and see how far off it is. Generator is out of the way, and this is what we're left with. Here's our original bottom bracket with 2 mounting holes. and our original adjustment upper bracket right here. So I've already held up our alternator in here to kind of get an idea of what it's looking like, and I've come to the conclusion that we can use what was originally the upper bracket, or meant to be the upper bracket for the alternator. We use that on the lower forward mount there. It gets our spacing just perfect, or aligns it with the belt just perfect. So what I'm left with is trying to figure out an upper bracket. I'll go ahead and stick this lower bolt in just so it holds it in place, and I can show you what our issue is and where we're at with that. The alternator's in and snugged up by just the one lower mounting point. I've used the original front bolt location of our generator bracket and just bolted our GM alternator right to that. By doing so, what we're left with is an alternator that is almost perfectly aligned with our original pulleys. Now I can add a washer in there if I need to bring this forward, which it looks like it needs to be perfectly aligned, but for a tractor, it's not bad. The only obstacle we have left with mounting this is this upper bracket, which we can't change up too much because it can't interfere with our governor. And if I just try to bring it down and bolt it up as it is, it gets into our blades here on the pulley of the alternator. I'm going to go look through my stash and see if I have another upper bracket that just happens to have a curve to it or is thinner that might fit. If I don't, I'm just going to see about making a bracket that bolts to here and makes this curve down to this bolt hole without interfering. Something along those lines. Something simple and using what I have laying around. This is off of a 1970s Chevy inline 6 engine. It had a little joggle in it, a little bend. Flatten that out in the vise. And you can see it's pretty close to the same length. It is a little short. We're not going to have a lot of adjustment on our belt. So in the future, I may make a little extension to bolt to here to bring this out so we can actually use this. But this curve in this bracket is what we need to clear that fan. Plus, this is a little bit thinner, as you can see, that's also going to help out. I'm going to hurry and throw that in there because the mounting bolt actually goes into the water pump and we're losing some antifreeze. So let me get that thrown in there and I'll show you what it looks like. A bit of an update. I got my upper bracket in. But you can see we don't have any adjustment and we're just barely clearing our governor back here. So I'm going to have to extend that bracket in the future, but for right now, it's going to work. I know this pulley's not right, but I just popped the belt on there to see our alignment, and it's looking pretty close. Like I said, I like this orientation because all of our connections are inward. We're going to be way out of the way of getting caught on any branches when we're trying to brush hog or do anything else. I was looking at our old pulley here, and it looks like the shaft size is the same. I think what I'm going to try to do is zip off that pulley and this one and see if I can't just swap them. That would be amazing if I actually could. That would save me a lot of trouble. Believe it or not, our pulley is going to work. So I zipped it off of here. The shaft size is exactly the same and it goes right on with plenty of threads for the nut. Now I zipped the nut on already and I figured out that we do have a small problem that we have to fix. I can pop this back off here. And that is, you see how this is almost flush with the back of the pulley? Well, that's creating an issue because we have this indent here. When I run the nut down, it basically sucks the pulley in and pushes the blades into the casing, causing it to stick. So I need to create a little spacer right here, space the pulley further forward so it doesn't do that. And to do that, I'm going to have to sacrifice the lock washer on the front. But again, we're not talking about high RPMs or anything, so I don't see that being an issue. Dug around in the drawer, I have this little spacer, which I believe is the right size. Perfect. Put my pulley back on, and we'll just zip the nut on. Now you can see we got a little bit of space between here and our fins, so we shouldn't run into that issue. So here we go. It's on there. I went ahead and used the thinner of the two lock washers, which was the old one off the generator. And we're just one thread shy of full engagement here. So you can see I still have one more thread on my nut that's not engaging with the shaft, but I'm not concerned. That's going to hold it plenty well. And if we were to run into issues down the road, I can, shave that spacer a little bit, because now I have plenty of room, and or do something else. But this will be fine. We have no binding, and this should actually improve our belt alignment, if I'm not mistaken. It's on there. Got the belt on. Everything's tight. We've got some really nice belt alignment going on here. It's about perfect. So the only thing left to do at this point is to wire up the alternator so we actually have a charging system. A little bit of an update here. I've got a couple of the wires run. The first is this little jumper that we make. It goes from the field terminal, which takes a female spade connector, and we wrap that around and go to our main battery stud right here on the back of the alternator. Also on this battery stud is our main power wire going to the battery itself, the positive side. So this is a 10 gauge wire. You need a real thick wire to carry the load. So again, another eyelet. I've heat shrunk it and ran this over, in this case, to the little junction starter solenoid here. So I've connected it to the same stud that our positive battery cable wraps around and connects to. Whoops. Connects to right here. You can see I've got a red wire coming off of here. That is going up to our key switch, and I just went ahead and put it in the same connector here so I wasn't stacking terminals when I'm already kind of limited on threads there on that stud. So this is just what goes up to the key switch, and off the key switch is our wire that went to our coil on the other side. So again, so far from battery source over to the battery stud, and then a jumper going to the number 2 field terminal on the alternator. Now the last connection, the number 1 here, is the exciter wire, and that needs to go up to our keyed ignition source. We have the wire coming off the other terminal we didn't use, the number 1, or looks like R, on the back of the alternator here. Just ran that up and ran it all the way up to our keyed ignition source, so the back of the key switch. Now, went ahead and installed a charge light, which is just connected in line with that. The headlight switch was here before, so I didn't have to drill any holes, and the headlights aren't wired up now, so no big deal. I can always move this later and put my switch back if I decide to. On the back, all we've done is take our red wire, which you saw down there coming from the alternator, ran it through the light, and then right up to our keyed ignition. So when I turn the key on, that has power. So what should happen is the alternator should act like a ground when it's not charging, and as soon as the engine starts running and it gets excited and starts charging the system, then this light should go out, indicating that we have full voltage. Got my voltmeter connected. See here, when I turn my key on, there's our charge light. Let's see if I can get it started. had a bad connection on my voltmeter here, but when it's running on these GM alternators, you have to, in order to excite them, sometimes you have to rev it up a little bit. So when you first start it up, it's not charging, give it a little throttle and the light will go out and it'll connect and stay connected. As you saw, after that, I could idle it way down and the charge light didn't come back on. So other than that, I just went through and taped up my harness. I'm going to come back and put some that conduit stuff over top of it, the wrap or loom, the wire loom over top of that to protect it. But again, that's all we have. So it's a 3-wire alternator. If you have a GM 1-wire, which is the same case but the more modern type, this will be even simpler. But again, straight to the battery, jumps from here to terminal 2 or field, and then this goes to keyed ignition, and that's your entire charge system. And on this side, all we did was swap out our coil and went positive terminal of the coil up to keyed ignition and negative side to the distributor. I need to switch out these terminals later on, since if you've ever noticed before, the battery terminals on the battery itself, the positive is generally larger than the negative side. So now that I flipped this around and changed it from positive ground to negative ground, my negative terminal is now too large to fit onto the battery, and my positive terminal is now too small. So I just need to swap out the ends. Now our tractor's 12 volts and it cranks over a lot better than it ever did on 6 volts. Is it worth doing this job at home yourself? In my case, it absolutely was, considering the only part I had to buy was the alternator. Everything else, from the coil to the battery, even the wiring, that was all recycled parts out of my garage. Now, if you don't have the access to the parts like I did, it may not be that cost effective to do this. If you add up the price of all the individual components online, it quickly adds up to the same or maybe even more than a pre-fabricated kit. But if you do have the access, you quickly take a $250 job down to less than $100.